Right now, Swiss waiting lists are a distraction. The real smart money is quietly moving into Japan. Japanese watchmaking has spent decades hiding its absolute best engineering in plain sight, but a massive global pricing correction is hitting in 2026. From accidentally rare $500 tool watches to hand-painted titanium masterpieces that compete with Patek Philippe, the floor is about to move. Here are the 8 Japanese references you need to secure before the market catches on and the prices skyrocket. Let's start with Seiko. 8. Seiko prospects. Here's a strange fact to start with. Seiko turned 145 this year, and the anniversary pieces sold out faster than the Swiss watches. But that's not where the real story is. The real story is buried in Seiko's own back catalog, in references the company already stopped making. Walk into a dive shop in the Philippines sometime and you'll meet a guy named Elton. He services Seiko divers for a living, mostly for people who bought them in the 90s and never stopped wearing them underwater. He'll tell you the same thing every time someone brings in a first-generation Marine Master. Parts are getting harder to find. Seiko doesn't announce discontinuations the way Swiss brands do, with a farewell tour and a press release thanking collectors for the journey. Seiko just stops. One year a reference is in the catalog, the next year it isn't, and nobody at the company tells you why. The 1968 Heritage divers, the ones that trace back to the original 300-meter professional model from May of 1965, get quietly rotated out in favor of the next Heritage reissue. And the ones that get rotated out are the ones that start climbing. Here's the detail almost nobody mentions. That first Prospects diver, reference 6,217 to 8,000, wasn't built because Seiko wanted a cool watch. The Japanese Antarctic research expedition asked for one. A government science team needed something that would survive the coldest, wettest, least forgiving place on Earth, and Seiko built it. 61 years later, the company still leans on that origin story every time it releases a Heritage reissue, and every time the reissue sells out and the story reaches a slightly bigger audience. The entry-level turtle at around $525 has no direct competitor at that price. Nothing else gives you an automatic movement, real dive certification, and Seiko's case finishing for that little money. But it's the discontinued limited runs, the Patty editions, the anniversary pieces from years nobody was paying attention, that quietly outperform. A Prospects from 2019 that cost $400 new is worth more today than it was 3 years ago. Not because it's rare in the way a Naoya Hida is rare, because Seiko made exactly enough of it and then simply moved on. So the pattern for Seiko is different from everything else on this list, and it's worth catching now because it repeats in every entry after this one. Seiko doesn't manufacture scarcity on purpose. It just doesn't bother remembering what it stopped making. The scarcity is an accident of a company too big to track its own back catalog, and accidental scarcity from a company this size still moves markets. Seiko was founded in 1881 by a young man named Kintaro Hattori, who started out repairing clocks. 145 years later, the anniversary releases across King Seiko, Prospects, Presage, and Astron all sold out within days, and the newest Marine Master reissue, the HBF 001, traces its DNA straight back to a 1968 professional diver that used a high beat movement before high beat was even a grand Seiko word yet. The company keeps reaching backward into its own history for its best ideas. It just doesn't seem to notice which ones are becoming valuable while it does it. I keep thinking about a diver in Cebu who bought his 6,309 in 1987 and has replaced the crystal twice since. He services it himself now, using parts a forum contact in Japan still tracks down for him, because the factory stopped stocking them years ago and nobody officially announced it. He's never once considered selling it, and he'd probably laugh if you told him the reference is worth more than what he paid. Would you keep a watch that long? One word. That's the cheapest entry on this list. Everything from here gets more expensive and more urgent. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. 7. Orient. Orient is the watch nobody brags about and everybody quietly recommends. It's owned by Seiko Epson, which sounds like a footnote until you realize what it means. Orient builds its own automatic movements in-house, at a price point where almost nobody else even tries. The Bambino dress watch. The Mako diver. Watches mostly between $100 and $500 with real mechanical engines inside them, not the cheapest movement a supplier could ship. And that's exactly why Orient is the sleeper on this list. Cheap watches feel the currency and shipping story before expensive ones do. A $5,000 Grand Seiko absorbs a 10% import cost without anyone noticing the sticker. A $150 Orient cannot. When freight costs rise, when the yen shifts, when import fees change, the brands sitting at the bottom of the price ladder are the first to move because there's no cushion left to absorb it quietly. Compare that to buying in Japan itself. A Seiko diver that costs $329 in the United States runs closer to $245 in a Tokyo shop once you account for the exchange rate and the export tax refund tourists get. That gap exists because Japanese retail was built for a domestic market, not for the rest of the world discovering it all at once. Orient sits inside that exact same structure. The gap won't close by Orient raising Japanese prices. It closes by everyone else's prices, catching up. So the honest read is this: Orient's prices aren't rising because of hype. They're rising because the floor under cheap Japanese mechanical watches has been eroding for 2 years, and Orient sits closer to that floor than anyone else on this list. There's a second layer to Orient most buyers never notice, because it's easy to miss if you only know the brand from the $200 shelf. Orient Star, the brand's own upper tier, uses the same in-house movement family in nicer cases with better regulation, and it started creeping up in price the same way Grand Seiko did a decade ago, just further behind on the timeline. Orient built its own version of the Grand Seiko ladder years before anyone was paying attention to either brand's upper shelf, and almost nobody outside Japan has connected the two brands that way yet. Picture a 19-year-old buying his first automatic watch, a mechanical Orient Bambino, $180, gifted by an uncle who wanted him to understand what it feels like to wind something and watch it come alive. That gift gets more expensive every year this pattern holds, and the kid receiving it will never know the difference. He'll just think uncles have always been generous. Nobody makes a documentary about a budget watch brand's pricing structure. That's exactly why almost nobody sees this one coming until their own favorite Bambino reference is $40 more than it was last spring. Orient moves because the cheap end always moves first. Brand number 6 moves for a completely different reason. 6. Citizen. Citizen doesn't chase attention. That's been true since EcoDrive launched decades ago, and it's still true now, which is precisely the problem. Because while Grand Seiko was getting the YouTube deep dive treatment and the watch media coverage, Citizen kept building strange, quietly impressive things and just not talking about them much. The Caliber 0100 is, by spec sheet, the most accurate quartz movement ever put into a wristwatch. Most collectors have never held one. Most collectors couldn't tell you it exists. That's the pivot with Citizen. It isn't a scarcity story like Naoya Hida, and it isn't a discontinuation story like Grand Seiko. It's an attention story. And attention is the strangest currency in this entire market, because it can sit dormant for a decade and then move a brand's whole pricing structure in 18 months. Citizen has actually done this before. EcoDrive first appeared in the late 1970s as a light-powered movement nobody outside Japan took seriously, sat unglamorous, and overlooked for years while people assumed anything without a visible battery slot must be a gimmick. Then, watch media finally explained what it actually does. That the movement never needs a battery change and barely needs winding, and demand caught up almost overnight. The same pattern is sitting in front of Citizen again, right now, with the Series 8 mechanical line. And it's worth remembering that Citizen was always one of Japan's original 3 watch giants, standing right next to Seiko and Casio long before any of them were household names outside Japan. Citizen just never seemed to need the outside world's approval the way Grand Seiko eventually chased it. That's admirable, and it's also exactly why the brand keeps getting overlooked at the moment its watches are actually at their best. The Series 8 and the higher end of Citizen's own boutique-tier pieces have been quietly building the same reputation Grand Seiko had 5 or 6 years ago. Back when Grand Seiko was still that brand people who really know watches wear super titanium cases. Finishing that punches well above the price. and almost nobody outside the hardcore Citizen forums paying attention yet. I'm honestly not sure Citizen ever gets the full Grand Seiko treatment. It might just stay the brand serious people quietly respect, while everyone else keeps buying the louder name. But if attention does arrive, and there are early signs it's starting to, the gap between what these watches cost now and what a comparable Grand Seiko costs is the gap that closes first. And it closes fast, because it already happened once with EcoDrive. Look at the Series 8 lineup specifically. Titanium cases, in-house mechanical calibers, prices that sit well under $2,000 for finishing that would cost twice that from almost anyone else. Compare that to what a Grand Seiko in the same tier costs, and the math stops making sense in Citizen's favor. Either Grand Seiko is overpriced, which nobody in the watch world actually believes, or Citizen is about to get expensive. There's no third option here. A watch repair technician in Osaka who works on both brands put it to me plainly once. Grand Seiko customers come in proud of what they own. Citizen customers come in surprised you even carry parts for theirs. That gap in confidence, not the gap in quality, is the entire reason one brand costs 3 times what the other does for comparable engineering. There's a specific kind of collector who owns 3 Citizens and mentions none of them. He's not hiding it. He just doesn't think it needs announcing. That's the whole Citizen problem, really. The watch does the talking. Almost nobody's listening yet. Citizen is waiting to be noticed. Grand Seiko already got noticed, and the math is starting to show it. 5 Grand Seiko Shunbun. Every spring, Grand Seiko drops a new reference tied to a Japanese seasonal word, and every few years, one of those seasonal references gets replaced entirely. The Shunbun, reference SBGA 413, is Grand Seiko's cherry blossom pink dial piece, 40 millimeters, spring drive movement, built to mark the spring equinox. Retail sits at $7,200, and it's still in Grand Seiko's active catalog today. That matters, because it's not the discontinued piece the pattern usually needs. It's the one getting ahead of the pattern before that even happens. Here's what the actual numbers show, and it's more interesting than a simple "it's sold out" story. The Shunbun still trades about 23% below its own retail price on the secondary market, sitting around $5,600. But over the past year, it gained 13% in value, more than double the pace of the average Grand Seiko. That's a current production piece, quietly closing the gap between what it's worth and what it costs to walk in and buy new. Watch what happens once Grand Seiko actually retires it. The mechanism is simple enough that a 12-year-old could understand it, even if the current Shunbun hasn't hit it yet. Grand Seiko makes a beautiful, specific thing. Eventually, Grand Seiko stops making that specific thing. The number of people who want that specific thing does not stop growing just because the factory moves on to the next seasonal dial. Grand Seiko has replaced this whole idea more than once this year, actually. 9 new references landed at Watches and Wonders Geneva in mid-April. 9 more evolution, 9 pieces followed in June, bringing overdue bracelet upgrades to the brand's flagship line. The seasonal Spring Drive collection got its own refresh in the middle of all that, moving from a 5-day power reserve caliber to a newer 3-day movement, with tighter accuracy and a redesigned clasp. 4 references got the update. 4 older ones, including pieces very close in spirit to the Shunbun, got quietly retired to make room. If you've been paying attention to the pattern so far, you already know what happens to them next. Grand Seiko released more than 24 new watches this year alone. Yesterday's flagship becomes today's forgotten reference almost by accident, and the accident is what collectors are quietly capitalizing on. A woman in Osaka bought her Shunbun as a self-gift after finishing chemotherapy. She wasn't thinking about resale value. She was thinking about cherry blossoms and about being alive to see another spring. She has no idea her watch is worth more now, and she'd probably be a little annoyed if you told her, because that isn't why she bought it, and it isn't why she still wears it every single day. Would you sell a watch tied to a memory like that? Yes or no? That's the part of this whole Grand Seiko story that spreadsheets can't capture. The company names watches after seasons and weather and light on water for a reason. It wants the piece to mean something before it's worth anything. The market just happens to reward that instinct anyway, almost as a side effect. I'll admit something here. I go back and forth on whether this counts as genuine appreciation or just Grand Seiko training collectors to panic buy anything with a seasonal name attached. Probably some of both. That's one discontinued dial. The The next Grand Seiko on this list has the hardest numbers of the entire countdown. 4. Grand Seiko Whirlpool. Reference SBGH 273. The high-beat Whirlpool from Grand Seiko's Four Seasons run is still sitting on dealer shelves for anyone who wants to buy one new today. That's exactly what makes the number worth pausing on. Watch Charts, the aggregator serious collectors actually trust, has the reference up 23.6% on the secondary market over the past 12 months alone, outperforming the broader Grand Seiko index by nearly 15 points. That's not a typo, and it's not one outlier sale skewing the average. That's a sustained climb. On a high-beat mechanical movement, the Grand Seiko didn't even discontinue outright. It just became the thing everyone suddenly wanted. So, what changed? Content did. When major watch channels started doing serious, technical deep dives into Zaratsu polishing and Grand Seiko's spring drive regulation, that reached hundreds of thousands of people who had previously filed Grand Seiko under Fancy Seiko and moved on. They stopped moving on. That's the pivot, and it's worth sitting with for a second. The watch didn't change. The finishing didn't get better overnight. What changed was that enough people finally saw what Zaratsu polishing actually looks like up close, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Here's the part that makes the story better than a simple hype cycle, though. Zaratsu isn't even a Japanese word. It comes from Salaz, the name stamped on Swiss polishing machines Seiko imported back in the early 1950s. Workers heard the name and pronounced it their own way, and the phonetic version stuck for 70 years. Swiss brands used those same machines and mostly walked away from the technique. Seiko kept refining it for decades until European brands started studying Grand Seiko's casework to understand their own equipment better. So the thing everyone is suddenly excited about isn't some ancient samurai secret. It's a German-named, Swiss-built machine that Japanese craftsmen simply got better at using than anyone else on Earth. And the Whirlpool backs that up mechanically, not just visually. Its high-beat 9/85 movement runs at 36,000 vibrations per hour, nearly twice the rate of a standard Swiss automatic, which is why the seconds hand glides instead of ticking. 72 hours of power reserve, a movement finished by hand at a level that 5 years ago, almost nobody outside Japan had actually seen up close. A watch under $10,000 is now competing head-to-head with pieces worth 2 and 3 times as much. And the market is only starting to price that in. An architect in Chicago bought his Whirlpool the week before the price jump really took off. He didn't know he'd timed it well, he just liked the dial. Now his friends ask him about the watch guy thing at dinner parties, and he still doesn't fully understand why everyone suddenly cares. Condition matters more here than people admit. Grand Seiko's finishing shows scratches fast, and a mint example can be worth 15 to 20% more than one, with the marks collectors call desk diving wear. Authorized dealers noticed the shift before the trackers did. A boutique in Los Angeles went from carrying 2 or 3 Whirlpools in stock at any given time to keeping a waitlist with names on it, the exact thing that used to only happen with Rolex. Nobody at Grand Seiko changed the production run to cause that. The world just finally showed up to a party that had been running quietly for years. Grand Seiko moves in thousands. What comes next moves in production numbers so small they barely register as a market at all. 3. Kurono Tokyo. Hajime Asaoka doesn't build Kurono Tokyo watches with his own hands. He designs them, oversees every detail of production, and then lets a small team execute his vision using Japanese-made Miyota movements. The result costs a fraction of what his personal atelier pieces cost, and it sells out anyway, every time. Kurono drops a new reference. Collectors who've been watching Asaoka's Instagram refresh the page at the announced time, and the run is finished before most people have opened their wallet apps. Asaoka earned this following the hard way. Back in 2009, he built Japan's first domestically made tourbillon, entirely by hand, as a completely unknown watchmaker with no institutional backing. It made him famous in the smallest possible circles almost overnight. Kurono exists because Asaoka wanted more people to own a piece of that reputation than his atelier prices ever would have allowed. Because here's what Kurono actually sells, and it isn't just a watch. It's access to a designer whose personal work costs tens of thousands of dollars, priced at around $1,000 for his production line. The gap between what Asaoka is capable of and what Kurono charges is the entire reason this brand exists, and it's the entire reason the secondary market treats these releases like lottery tickets. And Asaoka isn't working alone in this space, which matters more than it sounds like it should. A small cluster of Japanese independents, names like Kikuchi Nakagawa and the sword-polishing trained craftsmen behind it, have started producing watches in numbers so small that forum threads argue about whether the brand has ever actually sold one at its listed price. 8 watches a year, maybe. Compare that to Kurono's approach, which is deliberately the opposite. Keep the price low, let the volume be the draw, let scarcity happen naturally through demand instead of engineering it through tiny production runs. Both strategies point at the same underlying fact. Japan's independent watchmaking scene has more demand than any of these small studios were built to handle, and Kurono is simply the version of that story priced for people who aren't already millionaires. There's a quiet detail buried in the movement choice that most reviews skip past. Kurono uses Miyota calibers, which are made in Japan. Naoya Hida, 2 entries from now, builds on reworked Swiss ETA movements instead. 2 brands, same country, same designer lineage of influence, and they made opposite bets on whose engineering to trust. Neither bet has been wrong so far. A grad student in Toronto set 3 alarms for a Kurono drop last year. Missed it by 40 seconds. Bought one secondhand 3 months later for double what it would have cost at retail, and still felt like he got the good end of the deal. He wasn't wrong. A year later, that same reference costs even more than what he paid the secondhand seller. That should tell you something about where this is headed as more people outside Japan discover Asaoka's name. Kurono sells out in minutes. The next brand on this list doesn't sell in minutes. It doesn't sell most years at all. 2. Naoya Hida. You already know how this one opens, because I opened the whole video with it. May 21st, 10 in the morning, Tokyo time. Application window closed. Roughly 87 watches produced across the entire 2026 collection, split between 7 new references, plus 3 carried over from the year before, and the rarest of them, the Type 3 B4, limited to exactly 2 pieces at $108,300. The most plentiful reference in the whole lineup still only ran to 25 pieces at $19,500 each. No backorder list. No cancellation list, no mailing list, even in case something opens up. Just a note on the website saying the next application period opens sometime in spring of next year, and an Instagram account you're supposed to check when it does. Naoya Hida used to represent brands like FP Journe in Japan before starting his own label in 2012. He learned exactly what makes a Swiss dress watch feel inevitable, and then built a small Japanese team around recreating that feeling with a distinctly Japanese hand. Hand-engraved numerals by a craftsman named Keisuke Kano, each one taking up to 5 days of work. Movements based on modified Swiss ETA calibers, reworked and finished in-house. This year's collection even included the brand's first chronograph. Built around a restored, vintage Swiss movement nobody expected Hida to touch, in a case barely thicker than a coin. And demand has completely outrun what the workshop can physically produce. This isn't a marketing scarcity trick where a brand manufactures fake urgency around a run it could easily double. This is a handful of craftsmen making roughly 100 watches a year, while collectors in 3 continents apply through a lottery system with worse odds every cycle. The application system exists because there's no other fair way to allocate something this outnumbered by its own demand. The brand doesn't even try to soften how exclusive this all is. There's no brochure, no catalog you can request. The showroom opens 1 day a week, and if the day you want it is already booked, you wait for another slot. Compare that to literally any Swiss maison, which will hand you a leather-bound catalog and a glass of champagne the moment you walk in. Naoya Hida offers you a reservation form and a website in Japanese yen only, and somehow that's part of what makes people want it more. The new chronograph alone tells you where the ceiling is heading. $38,300 for 10 pieces, built around a restored vintage movement rather than anything modern. A smaller, simpler, time-only piece from the same collection ran $23,100 for 20 pieces. Every single number in this collection is a hard ceiling nobody can raise until next spring, no matter how many more people discover the brand between now and then. A retired watch dealer in Singapore has applied for 3 straight years and been rejected every time. He spent decades selling other people's watches for a living, and he still can't buy the one he actually wants for himself. He's not bitter about it. He just checks Instagram every spring, the same way some people check for concert tickets, and quietly hopes this is finally his year. Ever lost out on something you really wanted? One word for how it felt. Naoya Hida makes 100 watches a year for the whole world. The last name on this list makes 20, and just told the whole world it exists. 1. Crador. For most of its existence, Crador barely tried to be known outside Japan. It launched in 1974 as Seiko's precious metals only line, got its name from a French phrase meaning roughly crest of gold, and spent the next 5 decades building watches that rival Patek Philippe and Vacheron Constantin, while almost nobody outside Japan had heard of it. Even serious Western collectors would confuse it with Grand Seiko, when the truth is that Crador sits above Grand Seiko, in the same tier as Haute Horlogerie's most obsessive Swiss names. The Aichi 2 is the piece that proves it. 39 millimeters, platinum or rose gold, a hand-painted porcelain dial that takes real artisans real days to get right, and a spring drive movement whose finishing was developed in consultation with Philippe Dufour, the watchmaker Swiss collectors treat like a living saint. Retail runs from around $49,000 for rose gold, up to roughly $61,000 for the platinum blue Ruri dial. A shade of porcelain glaze that took the studio over 2 years to get right. Production, every single year, without exception, about 20 pieces. Made entirely by a small team at Seiko's micro artist studio in Chiogiri. Even the name is a small piece of theater. Crador comes from the French crête d'or, meaning crest of gold, and the logo is 3 peaks with 3 stars above them, a stylized version of the Japanese character for mountain. A company famous worldwide for cheap, reliable, mass-produced watches built an entire secret identity around the opposite idea and kept it almost entirely to itself for 50 years. Here's the twist I promised you back at Naoya Hida. This year, at Watches and Wonders 2026, Crador stepped onto a global stage for the first time in its history. Not a quiet boutique appearance. An actual exhibition booth, new gold feather tourbillons, hand-engraved dials, even a piece built around a locomotive design from the same era as the Aichi's minimalist philosophy, all shown next to the brands it was always quietly capable of matching. 50 years of near-total obscurity, ending in a single announcement. And production didn't change. It's still 20 pieces a year. That number isn't a marketing choice either. The micro artist studio isn't a factory that could scale if Seiko wanted it to. It's a room in Chiogiri with a handful of specialists, trained over years. Some of them, the only people alive who can execute a specific hand-finishing step the way Crador requires it. You can't hire your way out of that bottleneck. You can only wait for someone new to spend a decade learning it. That's the whole story of this entire list, distilled into one brand. A watch industry that spent decades hiding its best work from the rest of the world just decided to stop hiding it. And the supply chain that makes these pieces has no way to scale up to meet whatever comes next. Auction results already swing wildly. One platinum Aichi 2 sold in June for $55,000, beating its estimate by over 40%. Another nearly identical piece sold months earlier for barely $32,000. Nobody has agreed yet on what this watch is actually worth. That kind of disagreement doesn't last long, once enough eyes are watching the same 20 watches a year. An engraver at the micro artist studio has spent years learning to paint a Crador dial by hand, one watch at a time, 20 times a year, forever. It reportedly takes new artisans years just to be trusted with a single dial from start to finish. And even then, a firing can ruin months of preparation over a shade of blue that's off by a fraction most people would never notice. He's not thinking about global demand curves. He's thinking about the next brushstroke. Somewhere in that gap between his patience and the world's attention span is exactly why this list ends here. Every watch on this list got more expensive the same way. Somebody noticed something that was already true, and the supply never caught up to the noticing. Not a marketing campaign, not a viral moment. Just attention finally arriving at a door that had been open the whole time. in a country that was never trying to hide anything. It just wasn't asking to be found. Japanese watches are nothing short of amazing. If this has changed your opinion about them, like this video and subscribe to this channel for more.